All right, it's working. As usual, as happens before, the videos I had made for this class the last time are no longer available, so I'm having to make new ones. And you have the quiz 2 to take during week 6, and I'll leave it up for a week or so. As soon as I post this, I'll open up the quiz, which has 30 true, false, and mostly multiple choice questions dealing with the last 2 weeks of reading and watching. Um, and, in all the books that we have, from Zombie Holocaust to your book of essays. And in Zombie Holocaust points out when it's talking about um, the before it's really talking about the zombies, it talks a lot about other movies, and The Mummy's one of them that came out. Not the time around the first zombie movie came out. The movie points out though that The Mummy in 1932 featured Boris Karloff as the Mummy, and he and Bela Lugosi had a lot of competition, if you will, over playing the different monsters. And we know there's a legendary masked wrestler from Mexico called El Santo, and he starred in a mummy movie, Santo in la Venganza de la Momia in 1971. But he also made a zombie movie that I have and haven't watched yet, so I'll have to do that now. We saw the movie. I showed it, The Last Man on Earth. Another movie that was famous and an important movie for the history of what George Romero accomplished is also based on a story by Jack Finney in 1956. The Invasion of the Body Snatcher was the most famous of the 50s mind control movies, and it's been remade now 3 times, I think, at least two times. Yeah, nope, three times. The last one was such a bad movie. uh, I can never remember that it was actually a remake of it. The second one from 1978 is also quite good. In 1973, after Night of the Living Dead, 1968, but before the Dawn of the Dead that we'll watch next week, George Romero directed the infection film The Crazies, in which biological weapons or toxin turns people into the demented killers. They are not zombies, but that movie itself, the movie I'm going to show tonight at 4:30, is The Grapes of Death, and it's a pesticide that this French zombie movie that creates the zombies. And you see a lot more of the movies where you have pollution and things like that that are the cause of the zombie, um, people turning into zombies. So George Romero pretty much set the standard for that with The Crazies. Now, one of the things that's happened, and this was in 1975, and then, boy, did the Italians work on this one a lot. But David Cronenberg did a movie in 1975 called Shivers. And it has a heady mixing of sex and graphic gore. And it set a new standard for what became known as body horror. And this is the scenes of ripping bodies apart that become part and parcel of the zombie movie, especially after Americans saw the movie that we're going to watch tonight, Zombie 2 by Fulci, a famous Italian movie and director. Now, as I mentioned in class that we found in the 40s and the 50s that the horror comics, such as those by William Gaines, EC Comics, and Entertainment Comics. They did, um, they did, they did publish in the 40s and the 50s, um, before zombie movies were very popular. They they did they published a few zombie stories. They're not really like the Romero zombies, but they published a few, um, and because the people, they were quite popular, and uh, um, Romero knew of them. Now, in this, there is an essay that in your collection of the culture, whatever I can't find the book right now, um, and it's Zombie Holocaust. Excuse me. It's the other book. There was an essay I asked you to read called "Folklore of the Zombie Film" by Mikhail Koven, and he argues that there is really no, using something called the Thompson Motif Index. And this is one that's used to really identify folk tales, especially ones that are very similar. So he divided them up, and what they don't do in that is have any kind. It's all European. And it sort of, the whole idea there would disprove that the zombie originated in European folklore. In fact, it originated from Haitian folklore, mixed in with some colonization and imperialism. Uh, and so the zombie is a Western Hemisphere invention, if you will. Now, Zombie Holocaust does point out, as I mentioned last week, the ongoing comic book series to date. The most successful zombie series is and continues to be very popular on television, The Walking Dead. Now, Coven does argue in that same article, The Folklore, that both Zora Neale Hurston, and that's the book Tell My Horse, and Wade Davis's The Serpent and the Rainbow, they depict voodoo with a very sympathetic touch. Okay, they just take voodoo seriously as a religion, not connected with Satanism and other kinds of things that happen in many of the other depictions of voodoo. Now, stories. You read one called Life Sentence, and here we find Daniel Boyd is given his, I like the story, the scientist who creates monsters wants to learn to be a zombie so he can live forever, and he's dying of a disease. And what he does is, in the end, his assistant, who he's basically abused, if you will, financially and other ways, kills him and kills the doctor and puts Daniel Boyd into a room with the zombies who didn't pass the test. And so he's going to be forever ripped apart because he can't die. That's we call poetic justice some way. And in Life Sentence, Shanna, the woman whose child was sick, and Burroughs basically bribed her to work because he paid for her child, and in the end he gives her $1 million before she does in his dreams, if you will. She finds transients. She has to go out and find transients, homeless people, for Dr. Boros to use for his experiences, and in the end, I suppose, he gets his comeuppance. And after the operation, Shanna shoots the doctor and locks up Daniel, and she gains her freedom from all of them. I like that. Now, another one you read was Delice, which does deal with voodoo, and it takes place in New Orleans, where you do have the flavor, the voodoo practices, and you have the little girl Delise, um, that the Duplessis have horribly tortured kids, um, and then killed them, and Delise is one of the victims because she died because she ran out the house and out the window and fell from the roof. Now, Aviani basically uses a bucor and to cast a spell on the recently deceased and now resurrected Delise as a zombie. And as part of the ritual, I love it. She cuts the throat of Henry, the Duplessis Persian cat. I like that moment. And then has at the we have the end that Aviani uses Delise to avenge what the Duplessis have done, and in a way to allow Delise to seek revenge against the two of them because they were, especially the woman, implicated in her death. But at the conclusion of Ani Avi, Philippe Laplace, the Boukerman at the Cocon Gris, he would like her to join him, and she says no. She wants to let the little girl go back to be with Christ, to be a little angel that she thought she was, and she's not going to join Philip. She just, made a deal with him, and that's the end of it. Now, one of the other story, The Wind Cries Mary. And in this particular case, there's been a Holocaust, and it's not just the humans that have turned into zombies, but it's animals too. So Mary, the wife that comes to the door every night, because she's been going to the house and they were very much in love. Anyway, she went outside and gets the zombie plague because when she was not careful, a crow bit her neck. And he can't bring himself to kill her. And then the disease, very much the kind of disease, the way it affected people in the last they had on Earth, and they're called land sharks. And it's called Hamlin's Revenge because basically, remember the Pied Piper. And at the conclusion of When the Wind Cries Mary, and because he loves his wife so much, he can't kill her. So that's what I mentioned, that it's like, I think in the notes, it's kind of a cross between a zombie story and a ghost story because the husband, the narrator, kills himself. And so he'll become a ghost, and his spirit, and perhaps the zombie spirit of Mary, will be able to, I don't know, figure out how to be together again. It's an interesting story. Now, Bishop points out, again, we said this, talked about it a lot, that the zombie in Haiti, the purpose of it was to become the slave of the sorcerer, or Bokerman, who zombified the victim. And so they didn't gather in hordes, they didn't kill people and whatnot, they were very passive, but they worked for the Bokor. And then I walked with a zombie. Unlike the white zombie, Bishop, chapter that you just read, argued that depicts voodoo in a realistic manner that encourages audience to keep an open mind, which is exactly what Zora in the work ethnography work I mentioned before, with Wade Davis too. They depict voodoo in a realistic and sympathetic manner, and Bishop also argues that the zombie becomes a new subaltern class because the zombie is literally silent and unable to connect with the dominant culture through any discourse. Now, that subaltern comes from a woman named Spivak, who wrote a famous essay called Does the Subaltern Talk? And then she's talking there about the role, a lot of times, of women in India, where they basically were the unheard class because they had no voice, metaphorically, in determining anything much. It was all left for the men. According to Bishop II, in the pre-Romero zombie film, that the central horrific feature is loss of autonomy and control. They all lose control and autonomy. Remember, because they're more afraid of becoming a zombie than being killed by one. Now, the original, when we watched that, the original Night of the Living Dead, the radio and television provide conflicting information. Remember, this told you there's an ambivalence in Romero about various media. And we see this throughout, basically, including in Diary of the Dead, where you can't believe the media because there's so many different stories. And two we watched last week, that's right, the remake of The Night of the Living Dead, Barbara and has that line, she says that we are zombies and they are us, and it's us to determine what she means there. Now, they're mindless killers. We're worse because of what we do, is one of the ways to look at it. And remember, and two, that remember that George Romero wrote the Night of the Living Dead remake, but he didn't direct it. Tom Savini directed it. He's Romero's makeup person, and he'll be doing the makeup for the movie when we watch Dawn of the Dead soon. Okay, so, but he did that remake of The Night of the Living Dead in 91, I can't remember. Although I do know that Flint, as I'll talk to you tonight about the reading for this next week, it probably takes a pretty negative view of a lot of what Romero does. Obviously, I don't. And I think in the original, I love the way that the movie marks its differences sometimes. It's the mother who's dead or whatever. In the opener, both of the time, in both versions of The Night of the Living Dead, though, Barbara gets attacked by a zombie in the cemetery. In both of them. But she's a remarkably different character. And we see when the little girl stabs her mother, when the little girl becomes a zombie and attacks her mother, she just rips her neck open with her teeth. And then we see blood sprattling on with a trowel that she doesn't use. I just, there's marking these little separations from the movie. And then finally, many of his innovations to the zombie genre, giving birth to it for one thing, George Romero switches the fear of becoming a zombie that was dominant in Haiti, that loss of autonomy, to really the fear of getting killed by a zombie. There's not, it's just because the killing comes before you become one. But here, mostly, they're just, it's not, no one wants to become a zombie, and so you don't want to be killed or bitten by one. Okay, turn this into a movie, and the quiz will be up. Today is the 12th, I think. Is it the 12th or the 13th? February 13th, it'll be up for you this evening.